A quick word before we get into this week's episode.
I was talking to a head of school recently who said, Peter, we've got a strong strategic plan, but every time we try to act on it, things stall.
If that sounds familiar, you're not alone.
Big goals are easy to write down, but they often get bogged down in the daily, making it hard to stay strategic. That's why I built the school operating system. It's a framework that helps you align your team and focus your priorities so you can actually execute the plan. We work alongside you to extrapolate a one-year plan from your existing strategic plan, break it into 90-day sprints, and design a much more effective meeting rhythm that moves your team closer to your strategic vision every single day. And that's just the start. We support much more to help you build the operational infrastructure your plan needs to succeed. If you're serious about making traction this year, let's talk. Visit moonshotos.com/SOS. That's MOONSHOTOS.com/SOS to learn more and set up a time to chat about the school operating system.
Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am thrilled to be joined by Alanna McKee. Alanna is the founder and CEO of Scarlet Consulting. She does amazing work around strategy, strategic planning, helping organizations think through what is the vision and how are we going to get there? And that's obviously a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So I just can't wait to kind of roll up my sleeves and get into this. This is you could tell I'm a little animated right now. I'm super excited. I love this topic. But before we do that, Alanna McKee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Hey, before we get started, can you introduce yourself and a bit about Scarlet Consulting?
Yeah. So I founded the company about a year and a half ago after about a decade consulting with both associations and independent schools. But if we go back even further, actually, I started my career in schools. So I'm the product of an independent school, Georgetown Day School in Washington, D.C. Go Hoppers. My son just started kindergarten a few days ago. And I have to tell you, yesterday we went to a men's varsity soccer game with my son, which was such a whirlwind, going to the field, watching a team on the field I played on. But I digress.
Awesome.
So product of an independent school, I graduated college and was like, I'm going to be a teacher. I was wrong. So I tried teaching and then I was a school social worker. So the first of my half of my career, I was working in independent schools. And then I got pretty frustrated by the systemic issues that were preventing me from taking care of my students and doing the work I needed to do. And that's how I shifted into the association world, working in education policy and mental health policy, and then eventually went up a step further into consulting with nonprofit organizations, mission-driven organizations, member-driven organizations. I started Scarlet Oak out of the realization that schools and associations, their impact was limited based on how they viewed organizational strategy. And strategic planning is not about creating a one-page document that outlines high-level goals and opportunities. It's about creating a culture of strategic leadership. And I'm sure we're going to get into that much more. But that's our business, right? Our work is to partner with schools and associations to disrupt outdated systems and outdated ways of thinking to create a culture of strategic leadership such that strategic planning is not an activity we do every 3 to 5 years. It is an ongoing mindset and approach that allows us to assess the operating environment we exist in, review the needs of our community, and adapt and be nimble and shift the direction of our school or shift the direction of our association as needed, so that we can drive forward mission impact and ensure the sustainability of our organization. The majority of our work is what others might call strategic planning or governance, but we view it as much more than that. And then we also do a little M&A and research on the side, because as you know, it's a crowded market, and more we're getting approached by schools and associations who are seeing opportunities to merge or strategically affiliate with another organization.
Yeah, absolutely. You're definitely, that topic is gaining velocity in the space.
Yeah.
I'm curious, so how do you create that culture, that strategic culture?
Great question. So I think you have to look at it from 3 different perspectives. There's the board perspective, and it has to start at the top. It has to start with the board. But it also has to be carried through the senior administrative team and then the rest of your faculty and staff. So I think one misconception is that strategy is held purely at the board level. Everyone in your school should be a strategist. And while everyone's role is not necessarily to create the strategic plan, it is, you want everyone kind of informing that process and then operationalizing that strategy. So from a board perspective, it's the basic things like, do you have strong orientation and ongoing training to help them understand the importance of generative thinking, to help them with a skill set of strategic decision making? Do you understand your board's risk appetite and how comfortable they are with change, right? Are you using your board meetings to stay at the right altitude and focus on the right things, right? I'm constantly talking to board members about, or to boards and heads of schools, what tools do you have to stay on track? So Elmo is one of my favorite tools. I bring my Elmo doll to all my board facilitations. And it stands for enough, let's move on, right? Are we keeping our board focused and focused on the task of developing, overseeing, and guiding the strategic direction of this organization? So it's little things like marking up your agenda to make sure you're focused on the right things using Elmo, but also positioning your board to focus on the right questions. So making sure that you're bringing those topics to the table. It's making sure that you've got KPIs tied to your strategic plan, right? So that your board meetings are grounded in that strategy and an ongoing process. And then really working with the board chair, because ultimately, if you have a weak board chair, if you have a board chair that doesn't understand their role and isn't guiding the board in of developing this culture, it's not going to happen. From the senior administrative team, like the same thing is true. We need to be training our administrators around strategic thinking and decision making, because we're not learning that in high school. We're not learning that in graduate school. You're not necessarily learning that as an educator. And then ensuring that they understand that part of their role is to identify on an ongoing basis, right, what is happening in our school community or outside of our school community that might impact our school. And they serve as a critical information channel to the board to give an insight into what's happening, because we know once that strategic plan has been set, it can't be set in stone. It has to be a document that evolves. And so we need our senior administrators to be an active participant in communicating what's going on and understanding how that might need to shift the direction of the school. Of course, their critical role too is in operationalizing the plan. So ensuring that you've got an operating plan that outlines how you're going to actualize the strategy year over year, and ensuring that that's guiding your weekly or monthly senior admin team meetings. We need to build our strategic plan and operating plan into the way we're engaging with our senior administrative team, or in the case of an association, senior leadership team, to start shifting our mindset around, okay, let's go over the to-do list today and the fires that we need to put out, and instead say, are we constantly keeping our strategic goals or strategic priorities at the forefront of our mind, and shifting our approach to be aligned to that? And then finally, for our faculty, again, are we taking the time to ensure that they deeply understand the strategic plan, their role in that? Are we giving them training around those same critical skill sets? And ensuring ultimately that we're all rowing in the same direction, because we all know what it's like to have one rogue teacher or one rogue board member or rogue administrator who's kind of rowing in a different direction.
I love, okay, like check. Like I love everything that you just said. I think that's so true. I mean, and it definitely aligns with the things that I've been learning over the last couple of years in terms of like, how do you gain velocity as an organization? How do you move to that next level? It starts at that board level. Are they being strategic? Like, do they have the vision that's necessary? And are they setting up the leadership team for success? Are they investing in their well-being? Are they investing in their like strategic skills and things of that nature? And where I find real opportunity for schools, like every school that I have talked to, and I know I'm like, I haven't talked to every school in the country, but I've certainly spoken to a lot, they have some sort of strategic vision, right? There's something that they're pointing to for sure. But what I hear so often is that, operationalizing it is the hardest thing that they do. And especially for a head of school. And, I've had countless conversations with heads that you can kind of feel the tension, when they're talking about success of a strategic plan, because let's like call a spade a spade. Ultimately, that's one of the critical ways in which they're measured in terms of, are they effective in the role?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, I was blown away when I went back to schools and started working with schools as a consultant around strategic planning, at how many schools just didn't have an operating plan.
Yeah.
And that begs the question, well, then how are you actually going to achieve your strategic plan, right?
Yeah, but to be fair to schools, like you could go into any industry. It's not just K-12,
It's not just, yeah.
right? Like, you could
Very true.
hop into any, and this is a problem that plagues every industry at a high level for a good percentage of organizations inside of those industries. So, I think what we've gotten better at as, kind of I think as professionals, we've gotten better at is we're realizing the importance of the operational side and the operating system I like to talk about. So you're reading and hearing about it more than you ever have before. But I think we're at the very beginning of adoption of these kind of structured systems that build the momentum. Jim Collins' Good to Great, right? The flywheel, all that stuff.
Yeah.
We're at the beginning stages of it for most orgs.
And now a word from our sponsor. Leading a school today can mean juggling a dozen different systems across offices, finance, fundraising, marketing, enrollment, and academics, all pulling your attention in different directions. At Blackbaud, we believe it shouldn't be that way. That's why we built Blackbaud's Total School Solution. It's a fully connected solution designed for private and independent school leaders who want a clear view of their entire operation. From tuition to transcript to donation, you get one ecosystem, one login, and one source of truth. This isn't about more software. It's about smarter strategy. When your systems work together, you spend less time chasing down data and more time leading. Want to see what Blackbaud's Total School Solution could do for your school? Visit blackbaud.com. That's BLACKBAUD.com to learn more.
I agree with that. And I think, this aligns to the work that you do. It's not just, and what I talked about previously, it's not just about having a strategic plan or having an operating plan. How are you embedding that into your work culture such that it's not just another thing that you created that sits on SharePoint or whatever system you're using, but it becomes an active part of how you operate with one another? And I think that's the more challenging piece.
I mean, what's the old adage? Like, you finish the strategic plan and then it goes on the shelf and starts collecting dust, right?
Exactly.
It shouldn't be that way. There should be momentum behind it.
Yeah, I agree.
Hey, I'm curious, another thing that I've picked up on a lot is that you have, strategy that's created that's very ambitious. Like, I love the North Star. I love knowing that, in 5-10 years, this is what we envision for our organization. But sometimes, the feedback I get is like, is it both ambitious and achievable or just ambitious? And I'm curious, like, as you approach the process with schools, with associations, and I will say that we had actually collaborated back when I was at EMA and you're at your past organization. You were doing strategy work for us then, which is so funny that like we're all the way back here today. But like, how do you strike that balance with the organizations that you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on the most important aspect, because we want it to be bold. We want it to be ambitious. We know that schools and associations, just generally, organizations can't continue to operate under legacy systems and ways of thinking. They're not going to survive. So we have to be willing to take risk and disrupt and be ambitious. And yet, we're also working with limited budgets, and we have to be realistic around what we can achieve. So, in terms of the first piece, like ambitious, how do we ensure that? It starts with, and I mentioned this earlier, we have to get the board to understand the world that their organization is operating in, right? What are all the pressures that exist that are applying pressure to their organization, and make the case for change? And so one of the pieces of data I like to use is that in 1958, the average lifespan of a company on the S&P 500 was, I think it was around 62 years.
Mm.
And today, the average lifespan is 18. And why is that? Well, it's attributed to two primary things. One, an increase in competition, which again, you're seeing, insert whatever type of business or organization you are, right? Increase in competition.
I talk about competition all the time. I mean, schools have never been in a more competitive market. Parents have never had more options available to them. Public schools,
Yes.
charter schools, online schools, micro schools, homeschooling, like just keep going down the line. You have fewer kids being born. So more
Yep.
schools, fewer kids, like it just makes the competitive pressures very, very real.
Absolutely. So we have increased competition, and two, the rapid pace of change in the world. And it's only getting faster. And so what we're seeing is that these thriving organizations are not evolving at the pace of the world, and thus they're not able to keep their kind of status on that S&P 500. So what does that mean? If we are not constantly evolving and reviewing these kind of legacy systems and mindsets that we were built upon, we will become obsolete. So first we have to make the case for change. And that's for some schools and organizations, that's harder than others. And part of our job is to help build that case and get folks to understand where that fear is coming from, what's holding them back, and where they feel comfortable innovating and taking risk, and those non-negotiable areas, because there are going to be some of those, and that's perfectly fine. And then giving space for generative thinking, right? As adults, we're not that great at that, because every time we come up with a new idea, it's like, well, we tried that before, or it's going to cost too much, or the parents will freak out, or our faculty will all quit, right? And so before we can even explore a new idea or bold thinking, we come up with all the reasons to why we need to say no. And so creating that space for us to think broadly and generate ideas without the no's. The second piece of that is we have to then ensure that we aren't biting off more than we can chew. And so the second piece of that is making sure that the plan is achievable. And that's one of my favorite things about my role, is working with boards during that retreat to prioritize and to have hard questions around, yeah, these are all important, but what can we not afford to do? And we want to come up with all those fabulous ideas and opportunities, but then bringing them back to reality to say, hey, let's look at your reserves, or let's look at your endowment, and let's think meaningfully about how bold you said you want to be, or the investment you're willing to make in this strategic plan. Of all of these things that we discussed, what's most critical? What's going to drive us towards that envisioned state? And what are the things that we have to say no to or let go of?
I agree with everything you just said. I mean, that just all resonates very deeply. But you also have to create like this culture where you can test ideas.
Yes.
Not the big, bold ideas, but like let's test little things, and maybe even in isolation. And the way I always say, it's like, okay, great. Like your vision is to run a marathon, but you haven't run more than 400 meters in 5 years. So, okay, today we're going to run 50 meters. And we're going to do that for a few days. And then we're going to get to 100, and then we're going to get to 200. And next thing you know, you're running a mile, and like all these sorts of things build up over time, because you have to build your endurance, and you have to build the muscle memory. And like that this is where there is opportunity inside of innovation to be like, okay, well, first we need to actually establish that as part of our culture.
I could not agree more. And that's a critical aspect we talk to our schools and associations about, is building that culture of innovation. And it's concrete things like, do we have an R&D line in our budget?
Love that.
Do we support new ideas at the board level? Because that culture at the board level then trickles down to our faculty, to our senior administrative teams. How do we talk about failure? Do we empower our teams to try new things? Do we celebrate wins and losses? I'm also a big fan of Aaron Dignan and his book, Brave New Work, and his operating model, his organizational operating model. I think there are a lot of great lessons in there around the need to challenge the traditional systems that we're operating with. But also he gives a nice approach to experimentation, and how can we create tiny experiments within our larger systems to try new ways of working and to test ideas in ways that are safe and that can be built upon. We're not going to start with a multi-million-dollar opportunity. We're probably going to start with these smaller experiments or tests that allow us to grow our innovation muscle over time.
I love where you just went, and it gets my brain goes to, okay, like how do you start to build, I don't know, that culture, like at the leadership level specifically, so that, you can start to do these kind of tests and understand like where are the opportunities, and we're going to operationalize and actualize them. What are some practical things that like a head of school could do to help kind of build that capacity on a leadership team?
Yeah. Well, we talk about the need for boards to empower their heads of schools to execute on their vision. And the same is true of our heads of schools. Are we empowering our senior administrative teams to execute on the head's vision and the board's vision within their department? Are you giving your senior administrative team the freedom to test and to try and to know that failure is okay? I think it involves of empowering your team. It's about leveraging exercises and models like Aaron Dignan's to help give frameworks to senior administrative teams so that they understand, right? Like, how do I create a test in a safe way? Ultimately, though, I think it's also walking the walk. So are you yourself as a head of school embracing innovation? Are you sharing when you make a mistake? Are you sharing those losses and shifting them into learning opportunities? Ultimately, whether we put ourselves out there is oftentimes a reflection of if we feel safe to do that. And so I think by showing up and not being afraid to innovate and not being afraid to share, when you make mistakes, that goes a long way in creating that culture.
Vulnerability can be a real strength at times.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Hey, as we begin to wrap up, I've got a couple more questions. You're working with associations, you're working with independent schools, you're seeing a lot of, the current trends that are emerging. I think you mentioned like M&A at the front end of the conversation. With respect to independent schools, what are some things that you're seeing as business model opportunities, especially around revenue? Because that seems to be the number one subject that that comes up every time I have a conversation with the head of school.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm sorry to say, I'm just not seeing a ton of innovation there. I'm hearing day in and day out that we need to diversify our business model. But when it comes down to it, we're continuing to explore opportunities like auxiliary programming, potentially standing up, products or offerings, typically around professional development for educators and, renting our space. I'm not seeing as much experimentation. I have seen a couple of schools who have explored seed funding for students who have, business ideas that they want to get started, which I love. It's both, right, revenue generation, but also mission impact. I have a school who is invested in vending machines as a revenue opportunity. If schools are serious about diversifying their revenue portfolio and building a stronger business model, they're going to have to become more comfortable with the idea that we're going to have to explore non-traditional revenue sources and sources that might have nothing to do with our mission. And I believe that that's okay, so long as it does not dilute our mission impact, right? It does not dilute our focus or take us away from who we are and what our core purpose is, right? If we are setting up for-profit subsidiaries or perhaps even opportunities within the construct of the school that explore these additional revenue opportunities, I'm fine with that, assuming that they're feeding the mission and core purpose of that school.
Great. Hey, imagine a head of school called you and said, Alanna, I'm feeling like completely overwhelmed by the strategy, by the planning process. What do I do? Like, what advice would you offer them to get started?
Yeah. The first thing I'd say is hop on ChatGPT or Gemini and say, I need a strategic plan. Where should I get started? And, when I got it in my head that I wanted to start my own company and I had no idea what I was doing, I did exactly that. And it gave me 10 steps. And I said, gosh, I'm actually ahead of the game. I thought of 7 of these and I've actually already done 2 of them. So I think sometimes the unknown is scary and we assume that we're much further away from where we need to be than we actually are. So, demystify the process by just popping it in there and see what it says and get a sense of where you are today. The next is get a sense of where your school is as it relates to strategic planning. So do you have one currently or have you done one in the past? Is your board on board with developing a strategic plan? Have you collected data before on the performance of your school? Like, do you have a good sense of where your school is? All of those pieces are going to be required for strategic planning. So you can start to explore those and figure out where you are in the process. And I think, next is you have to find the right partner. And this is not a sales pitch, right? I'm not telling you need to hire a strategic planning consultant because I want you to come to me. But it's the same reason I send my kids to a doctor, because I'm not a trained medical professional. There are people out there trained in school strategy and association strategy and nonprofit strategy, right? That's what we live and breathe. And the most important thing you need to do is find the partner that fits you and your board's needs and your community needs. Because strategic planning is not transactional. It's not about creating a document. It's about getting your full community aligned around a shared vision. And that requires a lot of work with that community. We want to ensure that everyone feels heard and valued and bought into the process. So when they pick up the plan, they see themselves in it and they want to hop in the boat and they want to row with you, right? And you need to find the right partner who can captivate your board, who can keep them engaged, who can keep them on track, who can push them if they need to be bold, or who can tell them to slow down if they're too bold. So do some thinking around what are the attributes I need in this partner. Talk to your peers, other heads of schools who maybe have worked with folks that they like, and then go out and find that right person. Craft a smart RFP, and then do your homework to really interview those candidates, because the strategic planning partner can make or break that process for you. And ultimately, you want them to bring out like the richness of your school community, right? And engage them in a way that feels really meaningful. So that ultimately, again, like everyone picks up that plan at the end of the process, and there are no surprises. They're feeling invigorated and excited for the work ahead.
Alanna McKee, founder and CEO of Scarlet Oak Consulting. Thank you for coming on the show. But I do have one last question for you. If somebody wants to reach out, how can they do that?
Yeah. So you can hop on our website, www.scarletoakconsulting.com. My contact information is there. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, or just shoot me an email, atmckee@scarletoakconsulting.org. No. Or shoot me an email at atmckee@scarletoakconsulting.com.
Fantastic. Again, Alanna, thanks so much for the conversation. It was a lot of fun.
It was great. Thanks so much for having me.